we do a lot of user interviews. And then we also spend a lot of time on social listening to try to get the perspective from those non-users that we think are potential users. Because that's the other risk, that you spend a lot of time with your users and you just work for those current users and you don't pay attention to those potential users, which are the ones that are going to grow your business.
Welcome to How I Made It in Marketing from Marketing Sherpa. We scour pitches from hundreds of creative leaders and uncover specific examples, not just trending ideas or buzzword-laden schmaltz, real-world examples to help you transform yourself as a marketer. Now, here's your host, the Senior Director of Content and Marketing at Marketing Sherpa, Daniel Burstein, to tell you about today's guest.
Rebranding. We use that term for companies, but what about for you in your career? What is your current value proposition and what would you like it to be, no matter where you are in your career right now? Because as my next guest has learned, it's never too late to reinvent yourself. Here to share stories behind that lesson, along with many more lesson-filled stories, is Carlos Cantú, the CMO at Freepik. Thanks for joining me, Carlos.
Thank you for the invitation, Daniel. I'm very excited to be here.
All right, I want people to understand who I'm talking to, so I'm going to take a quick look at your background, just kind of cherry picking around. You've been Associate Creative Director at Low Lintas, Creative Director at Gray Advertising, Group Creative Director at Young & Rubicam, Executive Creative Director at Shield Worldwide, part of Samsung Group, Director of Marketing at Twitter EMEA, and for the past 2 years, Chief Marketing Officer at Freepik Company. Freepik is owned by EQT, a public company that trades on Nasdaq Stockholm. It reported 2.131 billion euros of revenue in 2023, or about $2.41 billion US dollars. And Carlos manages a marketing team of 45 people at Freepik. So, Carlos, give us a sense. What is your day like as CMO?
Yeah, never boring, I would say that. So, and usually different every day, but I manage different teams, from the social media team, the CRM team, the PR team, and the paid media team. And all these teams need to work together. They all have their own goals, but at the end, the marketing goal is just one. And my main job is to bring them all together, try to keep them aligned, give them the tools they need, try to remove the blockers they have, and then step out of the way and let them do what they do better than myself. So that usually means spending a lot of times in meetings and conversations, usually more time at Slack than going through emails. And then at some point, try to make time to think of strategic innovations and try to think more long-term.
Very nice. Well, let's take a look at some of the lessons from your career to see how you got to where you are today and what our audience can learn from it. So let's start with this lesson I mentioned right in the outset. It's never too late to reinvent yourself. That's very motivating, but how did you learn that in your career?
Yeah, and I learned this quite late. So I wish someone had told me that earlier before, because I spent, I think, around 15 years building a career by writing 30 seconds TV ads or the short stories, right, for brands. And I thought that was my business and that was going to make me grow and become a CEO of one of these big agencies. But at some point in my career, I went to a festival in Cannes in the south of France, which is the advertising Cannes festival, the Lions, they call it. And I came back very, very sad because the most exciting projects I saw there were projects that I was not able to do because they were not TV ads anymore. So brands were moving away from doing TV to experiential, to digital, to mobile, all these new things. Imagine how old I am to talk to this about this that way. So I realized that I had to reinvent myself. particularly as a creative director, you need to be always on the top of the wave, right? So, and I realized that it was almost too late. So I did a lot. I took a lot of courses or diplomas and listened to a lot of podcasts and read to a lot of blogs and tried to, something I think that helped me a lot is try to meet people that were doing these type of things, to understand how they think, what were they, how they planned what they were doing, and what was inspiring them. So I tried to meet them all, and I pushed for a couple of years until I got a good opportunity, which is this agency called Chael, which, as you were saying, they are the agency of record of the Samsung Group. Actually, they are part of Samsung. So they had an office in Mexico, where I'm originally from. I was based there back then, and they needed an executive creative director because they wanted to make their agency an open agency, which meant not only taking care of Samsung, which is what they were doing for a few years, but to start to get other clients on top of Samsung too. So I convinced them that I was the right person. Probably I was not. But I, fake it until you make it. But I convinced them, and that gave me the opportunity to learn. I spent 4 years as executive creative director there, and that gave me an opportunity to really understand technology, to understand mobile advertising, to understand digital much better, social. And yeah, it gave me the opportunity to reinvent myself, and also gave me open a new door for me, which took me on the next step in my career.
Yeah, so let me ask, I am kind of that age too. I assume I started in traditional. What do you most and least miss about traditional, and how do you apply that to what you're doing today? Because I'll say for me personally, what I most miss is, one of the things I started out doing was writing print ads in the Wall Street Journal. So when we presented to a client, a lot of our clients weren't local, like we'd actually have to mock it up. We'd FedEx it out. Yeah. So the deadline became when FedEx would come to overnight it, or even like if we were really pushing deadline, getting to the airport to FedEx it, right? So the one thing I like there is like there was some sort of ebb and flow to the work, because then you were done and you really couldn't do anything till you got the client feedback again, as opposed to now where everything is instant and digital. And so one thing I try to do is make sure there's still an ebb and flow to my work, and it's not just constant output. But the thing I don't miss, I'll tell you what I don't miss, because I've also written 30-second radio ads. I used to write it for a car company I won't name. And it was like, I think it was like 22.5, but then 7.5 for the disclaimer, or 8.5, or however the numbers work. So, it was very specific. And so now, like on How I Made It Marketing, when people ask me, how long is an episode? I just tell them, it's as long as it needs to be. I love that there's no media buy. It's as long as it needs to be. So for you, what do you most and least miss, and how do you apply that to your work today?
Well, yeah. So I think it was very easy and a lovely thing that you were able to write the whole story. So you knew how it was going to start and how it was going to end. And that was it. So the brand created its own story, right? It was very difficult. Yeah, some people would call to that small number on the back of the package to tell, hey, I don't like your advertising, but maybe 10, 20. And if you were very, very good, maybe a few of your friends would tell you, hey, I like that ad. I think it's funny or whatever. But the whole story was written by you, like you, this is how the story starts. This is how the story ends. And that's a brand. Nowadays, the brands don't own their own story. They try to jump in and be part of the conversation and jump in and be part of the story. And in the best case scenario, you trigger a story as a brand, and then you let users take it from there, right? And maybe you're part of it. So that makes it much more challenging. Also more exciting to me nowadays. But it was nice when you were the storyteller. Going back to what we were saying off camera, and which is that I love being, or I like being a storyteller. So yeah, that I miss a little bit. And I miss that you can spend that time where you could spend 6 months in one project. I'd like, hey, go brainstorm for 2 weeks, come back with ideas. The client will give you feedback. Go back, finalize the script, go to a few directors, get their visualization, their perspective, go produce the ad, like spend a month in the production and then publish it. In 6 months, nowadays, you need to launch probably 6 or 5 different campaigns But something that I usually say is that 50% of what I learned in that first phase of my career went to the trash, to the bin. Is not useful anymore. It doesn't apply anymore. But the other 50%, I think it's still relevant today. And that has been super helpful for me. Being an old school creative director, as someone told me once on Twitter, has been super helpful because I understand the value of having a creative concept, of having a clear brief, having a positioning for a brand, of having human insights as part of the creative process. And I think those things still benefit even when you post something on TikTok. If you have a human insight, probably your TikTok will be better than if you just come up with a nice, a catchy headline or a catchy meme or a catchy video, you know. So for me, that's a good balance.
Yeah, I mean, I go back to that quote from 100 years ago, talk about traditional advertising, the truth well told, right? I mean, that was the best quote I ever heard about what advertising is. And to your point, yeah, that's not going to change. You still got to figure out those truths, tell it well. Now there's different tools. There's TikTok. And like you said, the audience and the customers, they can see some truths back to you also, right? But it's still finding that truth and telling it well, being that storyteller, right?
And just because of what you just mentioned, that they will come back after you. You need to tell the truth. That's more important than right. That you're, you know, like that you're transparent and that you walk the talk as a brand.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, not just well told, the truth also. So that was one of the main kind of transformations or changes in your career. The other one here, you had the lesson, you don't need to know everything to do the job. So I think you kind of gave us that example with Samsung and the Shield group, like fake it, you make it. But you also had another transformation, right, after leaving agencies. You want to tell us about that? You don't need to know everything to do the job?
Yes. So those first 15 years, I never met someone that has been very close to me since then, which is my imposter syndrome. In those first 15 years, there was no imposter syndrome. I was never an imposter. But since then, I've been an imposter a few times. And I've been through this imposter syndrome a few times. And you know, like I still have my imposter syndrome sitting next to me very often. But I'm okay because I realize exactly what you were saying, which is I was not hired to know everything. I was hired because the person who hires me knows that I know a few things and hopes that I will learn the rest. Because, you know, that's the only way you grow in your career. And I moved from being a creative director to being part of a tech company. I joined Twitter and become a brand strategist. And very quick anecdote, when I was the first Twitter employee in Mexico. So my manager, who was based in New York, flew to Mexico to welcome me and to introduce me to our clients, because my job was to be a bridge between the brands and their agencies and Twitter, because back then, no one knew how to do advertising or marketing through Twitter. So I was there to help them. But I was just starting. So I didn't know much back then, particularly on my first day. So I went through 5 or 6 meetings with my manager on my first day. I listened to him a lot. I smiled a lot. I met some customers. And at the end of the day, in the last meeting, the client said, "Hey, I would like your team to come back tomorrow and give a workshop to my team so that they start using Twitter better." And my manager, JP Mahue, who I really respect, he was like, "Sure, Carlos will come back tomorrow and give your team a workshop." And I step out of the meeting and I'm like, "Hey, JP, what are you talking about? I've been with the company 1 day. I haven't even go through my training," because usually when you join Twitter, they used to fly you to San Francisco and take a week with them and I was going to do that next week, following week. So I was like, "I haven't even gone through the training." He was, "Carlos, you've been with 5 meetings with me today. You listened to what I told all the brands about Twitter. Now you know more about Twitter than 90% of the people. So you can give a workshop." So, and again, that was the first one, and so after that, I've been through a couple more imposter syndrome periods, let's say.
So that's great. You went from traditional media to digital. That was a jump. Then you went from digital to boom, right into Twitter, and no one knew how to use Twitter or even what it was probably. That's really impressive. So let me ask you, so that was the first day, right? But take us into a few months. Like, was there a specific tactic that you used to help you get up to speed as a marketing leader at Twitter? So for example, I interviewed Christine Healy, Chief Growth Officer at Seniorly, on How I Made It Marketing. And one of her lessons was you don't have to know it to lead it. And so she told stories too of, starting roles in unfamiliar fields. And what she would do is she would make sure she found colleagues that were experienced in that industry to learn from, to get a deeper understanding of the key goals and tasks, right? I mean, she always knew marketing, but she didn't always know that industry. So she's like, "All right, I got to find that colleague that knows this industry." So for you, Carlos, boom, going into Twitter, that first day you were just, I guess the fire hose analogy would work there. What'd you do in the next month or few months to kind of get up to speed as a marketing leader? Any specific tactic work for you?
Yeah, but first let me say that that's a very good advice, and I'm gonna follow it. I think that's very smart. Like, you don't know to know everything as long as you can lead the people who know, which is great. Yes. So first of all was like understanding what were my strengths, why I was hired, what was they expecting from me, and trying to learn what I didn't know as fast as possible. But I think that the first project that helped me a lot was with Pepsi. So they wanted to own the Super Bowl. And I was like, back then we really wanted to reach out to their main competitor. And we were trying to do our best with their main competitor. They were not engaging with me. They were not interested. And I had some other brands that I really wanted them to work with us, and they were not interested. But then Pepsi were super excited, and they were like, "Hey, Carlos, I think we can do something very, very smart." And actually, I need to be super honest about this. They had a great idea. And I was like, "Wow, this is a great idea. I'm the one who's supposed to come up with these great ideas, but the idea is there. Let's make it happen." And I just focused for 2 months on one client, one project, which was not even my idea. For a former creative director, that's very difficult to do. But I saw that as a low-hanging fruit. And my bet was that if we were successful, other brands will say, "Hey, I want that." And it worked. It really worked. So I was like, so the learning for me, and I tried to apply that since then. Every time I have a new challenge or new position, is start with something that you will do well, and gain confidence through that. and have a quick win. That will help you. Also, that will help your credibility and your confidence. So that helped me a lot.
I love that, especially for an emerging technology. And that's kind of, we were talking, that's what Marketing Sherpa is built on. That's what this How I Made It Marketing is built on. Like, I get pitches all the time from, we want to tell you all about artificial intelligence and marketing automation, lead generation, blah, 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 SEO and all this stuff. And it's like, I don't care what you think about it. Show me how you did it, right? That's what we're going to publish. We're going to publish case studies. We're going to talk about these stories. Show me how you did it. And that's the exact same thing, especially for an emerging technology, for any company. Stop saying how great you are, right? Just make some successes and then show everyone how you did it. The other thing I like about that is, like, I don't know about you, as a marketer, I'm such a sucker for a great idea, right? Like I like how you said it wasn't even my idea, but it was a great idea. I mean, I get pitched all the time for stuff now. People selling me and just everywhere, and so sick getting pitched. But boy, I don't care where it comes from. If I hear a great idea, I just love that. I'm just like, it just draws me in. Like, it seems like you're the same kind of guy. Like, boy, when you hear that idea, doesn't matter where it comes from. I want some of that, right?
Yeah. So at some point when I was with Twitter, there was this creative studio. I was already a marketer, so that's a little bit later in my career, but I was already a marketer. But the creative director position in the studio was open. And I was like, hey, I would love to get that position. And I talked to my manager, who was in charge of both. He was my manager, but he was also in charge of the studio. And he was, hey, Carlos, maybe, actually, I think you could take that position. I could give you that position. But if I give you that position, you won't have a marketer in front that will approve the ideas for you. And that has been since, I realized that's my position now. I'm an idea enabler. I don't come up with ideas. Sometimes I do. Most of the time are not brilliant ideas, but sometimes I push for my own ideas. But I'm fine just with whomever comes up with the idea. As you were saying, Daniel, I will help you. I will help you to make it happen. And as a CMO, just today, I had a very tough conversation with my CEO because we are launching a campaign today. And I showed him this campaign a few months, and he gave me some feedback, and he's usually very respectful. So he's like, Carlos, I think this and this, but it's your decision. And today we're announcing it on the internal Slack with everyone on the marketing team. And he jumps in. He says, hey, I already told Carlos, I don't like this campaign. I don't think it's the right thing to do. I'm like, oh my God. But I was like, hey, please, Joaquin Cuenca, he's the CEO. Hi, Joaquin, in case you're listening to this. I was like, hey, can we chat 5 minutes? So we had a conversation. And at the end, we had a good agreement that he was like, hey, Carlos, it's your decision. And I was like, okay, maybe we don't go all in at first. We publish the first phase. And if we see that the first phase works, we go all in. So, but for me, and then I go back to my team. I'm like, hey, don't worry, we're gonna publish it. And that was not my idea. That's not my campaign. It is, but it's not my. It didn't came from me. But I'm an enabler, and I'm very happy to be able to do that.
Well, first of all, thank you for being on How I Made It Marketing on the day a campaign is launching. That's very kind of you to give us your time today. But that's when we were in the agency. That's what we always wanted, right? Or, that's what you always wanted. You wanted that good client. You wanted that client that would fight for the ideas. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a meeting and you get that kind of middle manager person who at first went along with it, right? Then you're in the meeting with the CMO or whatever it is, right? You sold the director of marketing. Okay, you got everyone lined. You're in the meeting with the CMO. The CMO doesn't like it so much. Then the director of marketing is going back like, yeah, I don't like it either. It's like, what are you talking about? I know. We were talking about this last week. You're on my team, So I love how like the CEO, we're going to have those disagreements, but you say, hey, let's try this. Let's go for it. Let's not back down. Let's at least give it a chance. I love that. I think that's what we all need to do for our team. So bravo, Carlos. And
because I spent a lot of time pitching ideas to marketers.
Yeah.
But I need to be honest to myself. probably the agency and the creative director thinks I'm not a good client. I don't know. Maybe they think like, oh, see, he's so tough, and it's only me thinking that I'm a good client, and maybe it's okay. It's like when you become a parent and you end up doing what you always promised to yourself that you were never gonna do when you were a kid. Like, hey, when I'm a dad, I will never do this, and then you end up doing that. Maybe it's how it is, but yeah. But at least I do I make an effort to be a good client or a good marketer.
It's like we just talked about, the truth well told, and how everyone's got a voice now. So when this episode comes out, they're going to be posting on LinkedIn when we post this. They're like, what are you talking about? Carlos kills all my good ideas.
Yeah, and maybe it's a good reality check I need to have.
All right, so when we're managing teams, fostering their creativity, selling their creativity is important, but you also mentioned that diverse teams are more challenging in the short term, but worth it in the long run. What do you mean by that? How'd you learn that?
Yeah, so later in my career, still with Twitter, I was invited to become a marketer. That's how I ended up here, and I was excited about it, but it was a big challenge. But on top of that, I was based in Mexico, as I was saying earlier, but I was invited to lead the marketing team in EMEA, which means Europe and the Middle East. Africa too, but our efforts were more focused on Europe and the Middle East. And that was very interesting, but I've never been a marketer. I've never worked in Europe or the Middle East. So it was double the challenge. So my position was based in Dublin, and I was working with local marketing teams in the different European markets, the UK, France, Spain, Germany, and also the Middle East, particularly Dubai, which work as a hub for the Middle East. We were doing a lot of campaigns for Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Dubai, and the Emirates also. And also we had a team in charge of Israel. And most of these people were locals, which meant that my team, which was not a big team, we were, I think, 12 back then, but I think we were 12 with 8 different nationalities, 4 different religions or beliefs, let's say, and all kinds of diversity, which felt really exciting at the beginning. But when we were when we were brainstorming, for me, brainstorms are a 2-phase process. The first part of the process is very important to have as more diverse ideas as possible. So something I usually do is tell the team that we're not aiming for the best idea. We're just aiming for the larger amount of ideas possible. Because the idea is not to find that one idea, it's just to come up with different alternatives. And if we say that it's only about quantity, then people are more open to share ideas without thinking if those ideas are good or bad. And the reason we do that is because for us, the objective of sharing an idea is to just trigger a new idea. So the more ideas you share, the more ideas you trigger, and the more ideas you have, the more options you have. So that part of the process with a diverse group is great. The only thing you need to learn, or in my experience, the only thing you need to learn is that there are 2 types of people, introverts and extroverts. So find a system that works for both. Those who are very comfortable sharing ideas as soon as the idea lands their head. Others that need more time, think of it, put it on paper, and then share it. So we found a good system for that. But then the second phase of the brainstorm is, now that you have all this broad range of ideas, find the right idea. And that was super tough because people with different perspectives, different background, different experiences, you should have different point of view, and it's different points of view. And try to find what's the right idea, it's much more challenging, because finding a good point of coincidence is very difficult. And at the beginning, it was very, very tough to come up with agreements in those second parts of the brainstorms. So the first two projects were very, very tough. We usually didn't work on regional projects, but those that were regional, and when we all came together, or at least 3 or 4 from different markets came together, were very, very challenging. And at some point, I was like, hey, maybe I should appoint a project to one of the teams and let them drive it. But then the third project we worked on together, even though the process was tough, the results were amazing, were super strong. And I realized that tough process and that difficult conversations and that difficult process to come up with an agreement were key for the success of the campaign. So I was like, okay, it is what it is. We will have an amazing brainstorm. It will take us a lot of time to get to the right idea. But once we get there, we will know that it's a very strong idea. And that's what I meant when I was saying that, like, hey, that diversity helps, but it's also challenging. And you need to learn out of those processes.
Hey, birth is painful, right? Birth is painful. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, you're talking about diversity in your own team, and that's great and how you got to the ideas. I want to ask too about diversity when it comes to customers, right? Because a lot of times, so I think when we hear this word diversity, I don't know if it's as a society, I don't think it's marketers as much, but as society, it's just become diversity of like identity, right? There are certain things, whatever nationality, religion, gender, whatever these things are, versus, traditionally marketing was diversity of ideas. And so I wanted to ask how you make sure you have a diversity of ideas for your customers and don't just pigeonhole them into an identity. And let me give you one example while you're thinking. I interviewed SM Lati, the head of marketing at TSM, on how I made it in marketing. And one of her lessons was always consult other perspectives and value your own perspective as well. And she told a story of a colleague that inspired her. She worked for a video game company, and she led focus groups for video games, and she made sure she would take into account not just a broad range of ages, because I guess that was kind of the focus. Okay, that's an identity. How old or young are you with video games? But also a broad range of experiences playing the game as well, which might not map to age, right? So for you, Carlos, do you have an example of how you make sure you get a diversity of ideas about your customers, and we're not just kind of pigeonholing them into certain groups?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we spend a lot of time focused on that. Our product is a website at the end, a website with resources, a website with tools, and has a very global remit. We have 85 million monthly visitors, and they come from almost every country in the world, almost every country. Some very, very specific exceptions. We need to be relevant to all of them. But most of the time, because if you want to be relevant, you need to show that you know them and you care. For me, that's at the end. Like, you need to show your users, your target audience, that you understand them and that you care about them. And most of the times, that's easier when you separate them from the rest, when you talk about their uniqueness and not about what makes everyone similar. So if you want to be more relevant, you cannot be universal in most of the cases. Sometimes, which is okay. then you work on specific campaigns for specific audiences, specific markets. But sometimes there are some contradictions. So, for instance, last year we realized that we wanted to commit towards pride and sexual diversity, and that we wanted to actually have a saying regarding that. And the idea was based on this phrase, too gay, that sometimes people use as too gay in a derogative way or in a negative sense. And happens to be that in the world of creativity, in the world of design, it should actually be something positive. Or for many of us, it is positive. So we were like, hey, actually, too gay means too good, too gay, too good. But we have a big audience and a lot of users in markets where this is not a message that well received. And we got a lot of negative comments from those markets. At some point, we were like, hey, I was like, should we just eliminate the posts? And that same CEO I was talking about earlier and with whom I had a discussion today, he was like, no, Carlos, that's our point of view. And we need to, so sometimes you need to commit, even if that means that you don't make everyone happy. We also, like, we've been very, very focused on creating tools based on generative AI that helps our users to create what we always say, great design faster. And we truly think that generative AI offers us a lot of solutions that can benefit our users. But it's also true that for many of of our users who are professional designers, they feel threatened by AI. We decided to talk about it, and we're launching a campaign that actually talks about it. And like, hey, maybe we don't have the answer. We have a point of view, and let's have a conversation. So I think being honest also helps.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, it sounds like also knowing that you can't be everything to everyone. As much as you have a broad audience and try to be everything to everyone, you can't be everything to everyone. That is what a value proposition and brand decision is at the end of the day.
Correct.
And not even just about identity or anything political, really, but it's also like, hey, it might be, we serve designers best. We serve these types of designers best versus we can do everything for everyone, which I think is a mistake that you see some brands try to make, right?
These terms, and I've used this term a lot in the past, and I feel bad about it, but glocal, be global and local at the same time, or brandformance, you can do branding and performance at the same time. Come on, that's not real.
Make a choice, right? Put your foot in the ground, decide where you're going to go.
Marketing, it's exactly about that. Well, actually, any strategy is about making choices, right? At the end, there's that's
or it's just watered down and kind of wishy-washy, right?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, in the first half of the episode, we talk about lessons from things Carlos has made. The second half, we talk about lessons from people who he's made them with. That's what we get to do as marketers. We get to make things and we get to make them with people. And now we get to make them with AI, as Carlos has mentioned. So I should mention that the How I Made It in Marketing podcast is underwritten by MECLabs Institute, the parent organization of Marketing Sherpa. MECLabs AI from MECLabs Institute now has expert assistants, copywriter, project manager, marketing professor, and social media pro. It's totally free to use. You don't even have to register for now. Just go to MECLabsAI.com. That's MECLABSAI.com to start working with artificial intelligence and get it working on your marketing. helped you do some better marketing there. All right, so let's talk about some lessons you learned from people you collaborated with. Your first lesson was clarity and focus are keys to a corporate turnaround. You learned this from Jack Dorsey, who of course was Twitter's founder and former CEO. How did you learn this from Jack?
Yeah, and I think it's exactly what we were talking about taking decisions.
Yeah.
When I joined Twitter 2014, Jack Dorsey was not the CEO. And the company was not doing great, particularly in terms of users. It was not growing in terms of users. And so the board thought, hey, we need to make a change, and they decided to bring back Jack Dorsey. And the first thing he did was like, hey, what happened here? I think we forgot what Twitter is here for. So let's make it super clear. What is Twitter here for? Twitter is here to help people to give a microphone to the world and to make Twitter the place to find out what's going on in the world first. Okay, so do you agree? Yes, we agree. So now we're going to be focusing on offering that. So if something we're working on, it's not focused on that, we won't be working on that. And that sounds good. It's nothing new, but he took really tough decisions. For instance, he decided to kill Vine, which was this amazing app that was created back then and offered videos. I think it was 6 seconds videos with audio. A lot of people would say that Vine was the first TikTok. And he decided to kill the app. And it was very sad to many of us that really liked it and that saw a lot of talent there. And I'm not sure if it was a good business decision for Vine, but I'm sure that that was one of the most important decisions for Twitter. Maybe it would have been smarter just to sell it or just to make a spin-off and make it an independent company. I would have been very happy with that. We would never know. But I understand why he did it, and I think it was the right thing to do for Twitter. And since he came back, we just focus on being the best place for people to find out what's going on in the world. And you know the story. That was, again, 2014. So
yeah. So I think what you're talking about is brand drift. Like, it was a great example. Starbucks founder Howard Schultz came back. They were making all these different sandwiches and stuff. And he's like, no, this is wrong. You can't smell the coffee. I don't care how much money we're making from these sandwiches. Get rid of them. We need to smell the coffee. That's what we need to do. So I wonder, do you have an example of how you protect a brand from brand drift? Like, is there something specific you do? And I'll give you one example. When I interviewed Jake Watts, the vice president of marketing at PDI, one of his lessons was you should almost always do less than you think. We're always trying to do more, right? And he told a story about narrowing down campaigns, products, projects to just the highest priorities that will yield the most for, he said, the customer, the sales team, and ultimately the business. That was kind of his North Star of how he did things. So for you, Carlos, like, is there any specific thing you do to protect brands from that brand drift? Because there's always that, we just always want to do more, right? There's always something else we can add on. There's always another possible customer we can get, possible brand extension we could do. How do you protect a brand?
I struggle to do that every day. It's like an everyday challenge for me. So, yeah, I think that what helps me is to ask my stakeholders, the chief product officer, the chief financial officer, the CEO, what's the North Star? What's the focus? What are the 3 things we should be doing in this year? And I ask this question a lot and very often. Some of them have a lot of clarity and they know, and we commit. And with some, I need to come back and ask again because I use their own words. I always say that and this applies to anything. I think like I have the blanket, you're the blanket metaphor, which is I say, hey, this is the marketing resources. It's a blanket, has certain size, and with this blanket we can cover just part of everything we want to do. We will work together and put the blanket in the most strategic position to cover the key things we want to cover. I know that in 2 months you will come back and say, hey, I need to cover something that we're not currently covering, because that happens every time, and that's fine. I think that strategies are always alive, and they should be alive. But we will pull that blanket from one end, and we will cover what you missed. But we need to be conscious that when we pull it from one end, we are uncovering the other end, and we need to take that decision together. The only thing I cannot do is to make the blanket bigger, unless the CFO comes back and say, hey, great news, we have an extra budget, which never happens. So I use that very simple metaphor of the blanket to work with my stakeholders on a daily basis. But it's not an easy job. and it's an everyday challenge.
Well, I like that example because in the days of traditional advertising, things were naturally finite in some way. Like you had a print ad and it was that size, and sure, you had that horrible client who wanted to throw like 10 things in there when only like 2 would fit, but still there was a finite size. So I love your blanket analogy, because when it comes to something like a homepage, for example, where everybody wants to be on, you could just make that homepage go forever and keep everyone happy and throw everything on there. But saying that blanket, like it's a very like visceral and real thing of like, okay, it makes a lot of sense.
And with 10 companies is particularly tough. You know, like for instance, at the moment, one of the challenges we have in the marketing team at Freepik is that we have a very smart innovation team. We call it the labs, the Freepik labs. They are super smart. So they come up with amazing ideas out of the blue in 2 weeks. And they are like, hey, Carlos, we need to go to market with these. And I'm like, this was not in the plan. Like we were planning to do A, B, and C. How come? But it's a happy problem. It's just a very tough. It's very tough to solve. But nowadays, planning we're almost planning on how to work with no plan. We're like, how can we, put a team in place and a process in place that allows us to be as fluid and agile as possible, because we don't know what's going to be happening in 1 month with these guys, which is great, but it's tough.
Yeah, that pace of change has really changed. Here's another, speaking of toughness and discomfort, you say, embrace discomfort to harness creativity. You said you learned this from Lourdes Lamasny, Brand Strategy Global Marketing Director at Grupo Bimbo. How did you learn this from Lourdes?
Yeah, she was my manager for a long time. She was first the creative VP, at Gray, and then she was the CEO at John and Ruby Camo and and we worked together on those two agencies. And I was always like a very, I always used to hire people with a certain style, with a certain way of work, with a certain creative portfolio, because it was very easy to me, going back to that creative process, coming up with the right idea or finding the idea that we liked was very easy because we had the same context and same references and all that. And I think 1 year I hired a couple, and when I was going to hire the third one, Lourdes was, Carlos, you're hiring a new clone. You keep hiring clones here. And it's great. I like you and I like to work with you. That's why I hired you. But if you want to be a successful creative director, you need to work with people with whom you don't feel comfortable. and you know, like it changed the way I hire people, like, drastically. And sometimes it's just because their portfolio is different and because their style is different, which is easy. That's an easy one. But sometimes it means hire people that probably are not as friendly, people that probably might be late to meetings quite often, or that might be less emotionally stable and would require more time or require some time off every now and then. People who have very deep beliefs that would require them to do things that will keep them away from the business for a few weeks. So I understood that it was worth it going through that uncomfortable side of working with them because of their talent, because of their perspective, and because of at least getting different visions.
Yeah, so I can agree with that. I think we can all agree with that as marketers. We want these different perspectives. But when you're saying that, what I'm thinking is everything you're mentioning is like a management challenge, right? So how do you take these people that are difficult in these ways to get that good product, but how do you take them and create an efficient, effective team? So for example, I interviewed Andrew Berenbaum, the co-founder and CEO of FirstTube, on the How I Made It in Marketing podcast. And one of his lessons was embrace each person's strengths and align on an execution plan. And he talked about in the startup how, leveraging operational expertise and mixing in generalists and specific deep expertise and kind of putting that all together in a good way so they can all execute. So kind of going back to the things you talked about, Carlos, I could just hear a lot of people listening on the call, either HR or managers or leaders, and kind of wincing because, people showing up late and not working for weeks and all of these things sounds great in theory, but how do you actually align that into an effective, efficient team that, as you just mentioned previously, when things are constantly changing and it's hard to even plan?
Yeah. No, and it doesn't sound great. It doesn't sound great, being honest. And it's challenging. That's what I mean when I say it's not easy. I think that or at least for me, I can only manage to have a couple people with certain personalities in the team, understanding that, hey, maybe this is going to be their tough week and they're going to be off, and that the rest of the team will be able to compensate for that. And also making sure that their talent or their strengths are so strong that they will compensate when they are back, using that as an example. But I also have people, and it's very important to me that have people that I can trust with, like, without even taking a look, and I know that they're going to be there, they're going to solve it, and they're going to ship it, and I don't need to even take a look at it. And knowing that you have those on your team is as important. So it's not only hire uncomfortable people, it's just like include them, and maybe that was the advice I needed, because I only hired people that arrived early, that were very formal, that had structure, and I needed a few of the others.
The thing I like about it, I'll say, now that I've challenged you to figure out how the heck to manage it, the thing I like about it is, something I've always seen or learned in my career is sometimes people's strengths and weaknesses are two sides of the same coin. Right. And for example, Peter Drucker wrote, I forgot which book it was, I think it was The Effective Executive. And he was talking about Abraham Lincoln and General Grant. I think it was General Grant. Like, General Grant was unfortunately like an alcoholic. But he won all these battles. And so people were saying, oh, you got to fire General Grant because he's an alcoholic. And he's like, give me 10 other generals. Like, yeah, he's not well-rounded. There's a lot of bad things about him. But the thing that he has to do, he does really well. And I've thought too, like in people I've gotten to work with over time, like project managers who are really inflexible and really bad with change. But at the same time, kind of wanted that from a project manager because you wanted them to push for people to hit the deadlines and not, hear excuses about, well, everything is changing and all this, right? And so again, it's kind of keeping in mind that for some reason, I don't know, in society or in business, we've had this idea of, we want, everyone to be these well-rounded Renaissance people. But if you have someone who's really good at something, if they're like really creative, a flip side of that is, well, they might not be good with, like you said, showing up to meetings on time or reading the darn memos from, HR or whatever these other things are.
Yeah, exactly.
Or filling out their timesheets back in the agency days, right?
Exactly. Yes, it can be a perfect example, being honest. And also, like, people have good times and bad times.
Yeah.
And maybe they're going through not a great time, and then they improve. Sometimes it gets tougher or gets worse. And like I've had to take some tough decisions with people from my team because I couldn't afford to have them anymore. I couldn't afford to couldn't trust on something. Sometimes it was a matter of capacity. Sometimes it was a matter of commitment. Sometimes it was a matter of talent. And it's also important that you take those difficult decisions when you manage a team, because at the end, you're affecting a person and that's terrible, or a family and that's terrible, but you need to think of the team.
Absolutely. Let's take a look at another lesson here. Balance data with intuition for the full story. You said that you learned this from Joaquin Cuenca, Freepik CEO and co-founder, who you mentioned a little previously. How did you learn this from Joaquin?
I learn it every day. So he's a mathematician. He's very, very smart. He's scientific, I would say. So he understands data really well. And therefore, he always finds that the mistakes on the data or what's missing on the data. And he, every time I go to him with very positive results, he won't trust them. He will say, hey, this is too positive, too good to be true. And he usually is right about it. But what he says is, and actually this is a phrase from Jeff Bezos. One very famous interview he gave, he was saying, probably he has said it in other places too, but it's like when the anecdote and the data are not aligned, go back and check the data, because probably the anecdote is right. And I've been learning this, and I've been paying much more attention to the anecdotes. And even if I've heard that things are read 99 times, hey, this morning I saw and it was green, I would like, even if it's only one, I go back and check. Sometimes happens to be that it's 99 out of 100, and that's fine. But sometimes those anecdotes mean a lot. It's kind of like I don't believe in destiny, or I'm not very superstitious, being honest, but sometimes I feel like, hey, they put that anecdote in front of me just to give me an opportunity to check. So I use it that way. And that doesn't mean that the anecdote is always right. And don't get me wrong, it's not about trust the anecdote. It's just distrust the data. Go back and check it.
Yeah, I mean, I love serendipity, though. I love serendipity, right? Is that feeling of like, okay, this happened for a reason.
Yeah,
so let me ask you.
I agree.
Yeah. So let me ask you, I think this is a great example of, you mentioned, and you worked at Twitter, and as we mentioned earlier, like something that's changed is like, hey, in this era, like we can get so much feedback from customers that we couldn't get before. But here's one thing that I've seen is, sometimes the loudest most voiceful customers that we're hearing from are outliers, and we're not hearing from, the broad group of customers. And so this is a challenge with the anecdote, where the anecdote can overpower the data, and we feel like, oh, it must be this. I hear this. So I wonder, how do you balance? I don't know if you engage in A/B testing or folks, what do you do for customer research to make sure that those just few loud voices, those few loud anecdotes don't overpower the data? And at the end of the day, we're understanding our broad range of customers and not just listening to those loud voices. Is there anything specific you do for customer research? I don't know, A/B testing, surveys, focus groups, whatever. What have you found works for you?
A/B testing every day. We do user interviews every week for different reasons and with different topics, but we do a lot of user interviews. And then we also spend a lot of time on social listening to try to get the perspective from those non-users that we think are potential users, because that's the other risk, that you spend a lot of time with your users and you just work for those current users and you don't pay attention to those potential users, which are the ones that are going to grow your business, right? So we try to keep a balance there between users and audience, non-users. We A/B test all the time. Some channels are better for than others. I love CRM, for instance. CRM allow us to test a lot of things constantly, and you have a lot of data. But all that said, those outliers that are very loud customers might be more relevant than those that are more quiet. It's not enough and you shouldn't just focus on them, but those who are loudspeakers can influence others or will influence others. So that's why they are particularly relevant, because they are opinion leaders among their peers, and that's important too. And usually if they are very, it's difficult, but if you're able to turn around a user that doesn't like your product and you listen to them, you reply, and you convince them, they become very loyal, and they are. It's more probable that they become advocates than those that are quiet and love your product.
That's a good point. Your most passionate complainers could also be your most passionate fans, and vice versa. You got to be careful of those passionate fans, never to let them down, because you will hear it. All the reasons you are great, in a few weeks, if you let them down, are all the reasons you're not. So that's a really good point. Carlos, we've talked about so many different things about what it means to be a marketer. You've been both on the agency side, on the brand side. You've been in traditional, you've been in digital, social, everything, AI now. So if you had to break it down, what are the key qualities of an effective marketer?
Yeah. I think that there are three things that are very important. It's difficult, but I'm going to just mention three. Might not be enough, but it's a good start. The first one is to understand that it's a business, and the health of the business is key. If the business is not healthy, nothing else matters. Second, that having a healthy business is never enough. And a healthy business also requires to have a satisfied user that is finding on your product or your service a value. Someone that values what you offer them. So for me, those are two very, very important things to keep in mind every day, pretty basic, but like, hey, how's the business doing? How can we improve the business? How is our user thinking? How are they feeling? What can we do to do a better job for them? And that's on a daily basis. And the third thing is, no matter who is your customer, if you're in B2B, you're in B2C, if you are in tech, if you're brick and mortar or you're online, we are connecting with human beings. Keep it human. Like, keep in mind that there's no human decision that it's 100% rational. And that if you don't play into the emotions, you will never succeed, in my experience.
I love that. B2B, there are emotions too. It's not just all on logic. I see that.
Because B2B, you're not talking to businesses. And I spent 5 years on B2B marketing with Twitter. And you're not talking to businesses. You're talking to people who lead the business. But at the end, you need to convince one person, right? And that decision will never be 100% rational.
No, it's beautiful, especially with tech companies. I see they're just like logic. They're like, let's just push all this logic down their throat of these features and functions and risks and FUD and things that will mess up if they don't happen. Versus, like you said, it's a human decision on two levels, for the company and then for that individual's career that you got to consider. So I love that. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Carlos. This was a very human conversation. I learned a lot from it. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. It's been a pleasure, and I really enjoyed it, and I hope that people get something out of it.
And thank you to everyone for listening.
Thank you for joining us for How I Made It in Marketing with Daniel Burstein. Now that you've gotten inspiration for transforming yourself as a marketer, get some ideas for your next marketing campaign from Marketing Sherpa's extensive library of free case studies at marketingsherpa.com. That's marketingsherpa.com.